Hello and welcome to the Digital Mythology Podcast. I'm your host, Declan Goodman. Today I have a really exciting guest on. It's Cheng Yeo from Melbourne, Australia. Cheng is going to talk to us about her professional journey and personal journey and experience with technology, in particular for Cleft affected peoples. Cheng, welcome to the podcast. It's a delight to have you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So Cheng, just to introduce you more formally, you're Vice President of the Cleft, Palate and Lip Society of Victoria in Australia, and you're also Manager of Enterprise Architecture and Strategy at Crown Resorts Australia. So you're pretty busy. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, that would be true.
So thanks for joining us. So today we're going to be talking about three digital mythology. What I do is I like to use mythology and ancient storytelling to help people better understand the human side of tech. And today we're going to be talking about three quite important aspects of those that are Cleft affected. We're going to be using three myths. As always, I like to use mythology from ancient storytelling. We're going to be talking about Menzies' mother. We're going to be talking about Theseus and the labyrinth, and of course, You the Great. So maybe before we start, Cheng, do you want to just share a little bit about your background and please, just to kick off with the guests and what your relationship with technology is in general and with Cleft affected people.
Okay, so let me start with tech, perhaps. So I grew up in quite a traditional Chinese family. I grew up in Malaysia, and then as a teenager, I moved to Australia. And most Chinese families like you to take a very traditional career path. Do accounting or medicine or law, and I didn't want to do any of that. Instead, I picked an IT business degree. My parents actually ran a business, so it was related but kind of not related, and that's how I ended up in technology. That degree gave me a wonderful opportunity, a head start in my career. I got a scholarship, and that meant that I had an opportunity to do industry-based learning before I even graduated. So then from then on, I knew I was going to finish university with a job offer in my hand, and I did. And that's how I ended up the last, 30 years in tech.
Great. And you've been mainly based in Melbourne, is that right, for most of your time?
Yes, that's right. I have been mainly based in Melbourne. I worked a brief stint in Sydney and a little brief stint in Canberra, but mostly in Melbourne.
Fantastic. And I do follow you on LinkedIn. You're very good at storytelling, I have to say, and that's why I reached out to you to join this podcast, because it's all about storytelling for tech. But you told me a really interesting story as well about your personal situation with a Cleft affected son, was it? Is that right? So
That's
maybe,
right.
yeah, I'd like to maybe, if you don't mind sharing with the audience a little bit more about that as well, because it's quite
Sure.
interesting.
So my son Josh, who is now 14, was born with a cleft lip and palate. I don't really know if there's a family connection. Some of the reasons for a cleft is sometimes genetic, but it's very, no one in living memory has a cleft, so I don't really know why he has a cleft, but he does. So when I was first diagnosed during I went to my 20-week scan, just expecting everything to be normal, and then was told by the sonographer and my OB that there is a cleft lip and palate involved, and so it was quite a anxious time, I think, the remainder of the pregnancy. And I was very fortunate to meet someone from Cleft Pals Victoria the day I received my diagnosis. And it was just by complete fluke. She was on the committee for Cleft Pals Victoria, and she had her son with her who had a cleft. And when I met them in my OB's reception rooms, he was I think he was about 1.5 years old, and he was just eating a peanut butter sandwich. And that's when I knew it was going to be okay. Before
Yeah.
that, I was
Yeah.
going, oh my goodness, what is going to happen? And when I saw him eating a sandwich, I was like, oh, he's eating just fine.
Mm. That was
So,
must have been great
and
to
that
see
was
that.
really the beginning of my relationship with Cleft House Victoria.
Hmm.
I joined as a committee member as soon as Josh was born, and I had done various roles on the committee. I kind of managed their social media. I did grants for them because they had a connection to the work that I did. At the end of the day, a grant strategy is not too dissimilar to a tech strategy, to anything else, really. It's a
Mm.
fundraising strategy to try and so that we can afford to do the things that we want to do to serve our community. And yes, so I became their grant officer. And then at some point, I became their president because nobody else wanted to be a president. And I'm now in a vice president capacity, mainly because I just wanted to focus on the strategy work, and I left the operational parts of running a charity with other committee members.
Fantastic. Very interesting. I guess that would have got you into this space then as well. I mean, there's nothing like family members, a bit of a calling, isn't it, to figure out, what can you do with your skill set, because working in tech and strategy and leadership, we do have a lot of useful skills, when it comes to lobbying and grant applications and understanding systems and bureaucracy and all that. So, and sometimes, it's really nice to have something like that outside of your professional day to day work where you can apply similar type rule skills, I guess, to get good outcomes. Look, we were going to talk about three things, right? So the three sections is really around, early intervention. So we'll just, for me, what I like to do is, to explain how technology helps and to tell that story, I like to use myth. So I'm going to mention the tale of Menzies' mother, which is a lovely tale about a woman who, when she had a son, she was concerned that she knew a real fact is that where your children hang out, where your environment is, shapes them. And so the tale is she moved from, initially he was very young and she was surrounded by a marketplace. And so she was concerned the son would become orientated to be a mercenary, to be a trader, etc. So then she moved, but that was next to a graveyard. And so she was a bit concerned that the son would be too involved with mourning and all of that kind of stuff. But then she moved intentionally to beside a college, a school, where she knew that the son would get involved in scholars, etc. And eventually the tale is that he went on to become a scholar himself. It's a lovely story to remind us that, the environment you're in can help is very important when it comes to shaping the outcome, especially for your children. And that comes to tech. So the reason I use that metaphor, that tale, is because, you may not be able to access the right healthcare you need. And I think I think you spoke about that before, Cheng. I might get you to elaborate a bit on that. But when you're young, when your babies are young and they're born and they're cleft affected, there's pretty there's not a great amount of resources accessible to you. So the idea is instead of, up and moving, you can use tech to help do that.
Yeah. So, the typical cleft journey is there's usually a few surgeries involved. If the child has a cleft lip, which is affecting the front part of their face only, and is usually visible, there's usually a surgery before they turn 6 months old. And then the second surgery, if there is a cleft palate as well, which is the roof of the mouth or the area of the face behind the roof of the mouth, there's usually another operation around 12 months old, roughly before speech, like is developed in a
Okay.
child. Then you don't really have anything surgical until much later on in life. So if all goes well and there's no jaw issues or anything, you probably don't have another operation until you have what's called a bone graft, which is around the ages of 11 to 13, 14, which is really, it's cosmetic. So where the cleft is, there is no bone there. So there is an adult incisor tooth that doesn't descend because there's no bone there. So there's a bone graft surgery around that age.
Okay.
And then most cleft kids have a last surgery when they are adults, so around the 18 and 20-year-old mark. And it's usually related to the nose. And that's to correct any kind of deviated septums or anything so that, there's breathing is much better.
Okay. So so pretty much the early years are pretty important then, right? Between 1 to 4, say, age 1 up to 3 or 4, or even younger. You want to get it, first of all, diagnosed. Well, pretty reasonable fast at that. But then
Yes.
you want to, I guess, the idea would be where technology today, internet access or access to information, etc., for parents or carers of cleft affected people can be a real enabler, it can be pretty powerful stuff when
Yeah.
to, 3 or 4 decades ago, they wouldn't have had that type of support. So it's
Absolutely.
really good. And I think that was part of your application, isn't it? Your grant process you mentioned about the
Yeah,
digital
that's right.
access. Is that right?
Yes. So, you know, like any parent, you watch for milestones for your child's
Hmm.
development. And one of the things to watch for is development of speech. So when you have a structural issue with, the shape of your mouth and the muscles in your mouth, speech development can be quite tricky because a child learns to speak in a certain way, but it's really about using the muscles, and your mouth correctly. And when you have a structural defect, sometimes speech can develop, incorrectly. Like they start to talk with a lisp, or they use an inappropriate or like the wrong
Hmm.
part of their mouth, so that you missed, from a speech point of view, you can't say certain sounds. So that early
Okay.
intervention is really, really important. And there is support in the form of access to a cleft qualified speech pathologist in Australia as part of the Cleft Clinic. I mean, I have to say, we're very lucky in Melbourne to have two world class pediatric hospitals who have a cleft
Mm.
unit each. And the gold standards with cleft care is really to have a multidisciplinary team. There's usually a plastic surgeon that's involved with all the,
Okay.
the repairs. You might have an ENT specialist because the palate is connected to the ears, so there's sometimes hearing problems.
Okay.
There is a speech pathologist involved, and there's an oral and maxillofacial surgeon, and at some point also dentists and orthodontists. So it's quite a big, medical team
Definitely.
that cares for you. So in Melbourne, if you were a child that was, that has a cleft lip and palate, you would be part of this network. And that care is coordinated through a cleft care nurse who basically connects all the specialists. So at critical points in a child's development, the two hospitals provide an assessment, but not therapy. I mean, if you can imagine, Australia's
Mm.
a very big country. I mean, even
Yeah.
Victoria alone, it's gigantic,
It's
and
massive.
so often it's a tyranny of distance. Where the services you need may not always be in the town or the wherever it is
Yeah.
that you live. That's especially true of regional families who often they might be traveling up to 2 to 3 hours to get to the two like primary pediatric hospitals for that cleft appointment, and then you kind of go bang, 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 see different specialists at the same time. And then it's the in between time that we need to watch for. So when
Mm.
language develops, the key thing is knowing when early intervention is required. And that's really what the grant was about. A couple of years ago, when I took on the president's role, we did a little survey with the community to kind of understand what were some of the challenges that they faced, so that as a charity we could be their voice to to health institutions and so forth about how we can help them.
Yeah.
We, as a committee, we did a call tree and we rang about 150 families. And we just did put a call out to say, hey, we want to talk to you wherever you live, doesn't matter if you're not in Victoria. If we would like to understand, what concerns you have about your child's development. And overwhelmingly of the families that we contacted, it was concerns with access to speech therapy. I mean, there were families who, were in rural Western Australia who said, well, we're a really long way away, from
Definitely.
Perth,
Yeah.
and the services aren't here. And, it's very hard to access service. And that's where
Yeah.
technology comes in.
Yeah.
Like the reality of this country means that often we need to consider telehealth as a means of accessing the medical care that you need, just because it's not always in the town that you live in.
And look, that reminds me of the myth about Theseus and the labyrinth, right? I like that one where he went in to slay the Minotaur, and he uses Ariadne's thread, which is the secret. That's why he was the hero, because he had a thread to find his way back. And I think that resonates for me when it comes to technology helping the parents and the carers of cleft affected people, because the thread was sort of this access to therapy or access to knowledge or a shared community, because often living out in the outback in Australia, it's so remote, you hardly see your neighbours from one end of the week to the next, let alone your local nurse or your healthcare facility. So yeah, that was a nice one as well. And I remember you were talking about parents becoming co-therapists type thing, right? So technology again can empower them to have access to information where the therapist, the expert, does their bit, but then when they leave, or as you say, 4 or 5 hour drive back to where they live, they're not going to see a therapist maybe for another year or 2 years. It could be that long. It could be a fairly
Yes.
stretched out period. So puts more pressure on the parents and the carers to do that. And that again is where technology can keep that up to date, give them access. Telehealth is fantastic enabler. Good for inclusion, right? It just brings anybody together. So it's not just, those who have access to cities or the
Yes.
big towns.
Yes, 100%. So I was very lucky that, during my time as president and vice president of Cleft Pals, that I had, I kind of connected with a bunch of people in the different sectors who are not just doctors, but I connected with someone in the philanthropy sector,
Okay.
partly, because I was trying to figure out how to afford all these things that the charity wanted to do.
Yeah.
Uh, and Ricky was quite amazing with the knowledge and network that she had, with people who had funds, philanthropic funds that we could access with through a grant process to enable some of the grassroots community connection that we wanted to do. And then through Ricky, she introduced me to a social enterprise who was running telehealth speech pathology services. I met with the founder of UMBO, and Way's an amazing guy.
Wow.
And because he recognized the same problem, that the problem was the speech pathologists were mostly in Melbourne and Sydney, and there
Yeah.
were a lot of people who didn't live in the cities.
Yeah. And yeah.
And that was really where, I had many good conversations with Way about, in those early years, of course, you need access to the right cleft qualified speech pathologist, but it is also about practice. When, especially I think Josh's surgeon, when Josh had his surgery, gave me a very good piece of advice, and he said, if if your son was to one day decide that he wanted to play a musical instrument, get
Hmm.
him to play a brass or a woodwind instrument, because all of them involve the mouth. And, by playing the instrument, you're actually exercising those muscles in your mouth, which is going to be excellent for him in the long run.
Ah, very good.
So, and that's it really. And Wei said exactly the same thing. It is about practice and repetition. So one of his, one of the things that he aims for is it's not so much about, doing telehealth or doing therapy with the child. Sometimes it is, but it's actually doing telehealth with the parents, so that it's a bit like train the trainer. You train the parents to watch
Yeah.
out for the right things, or ideas with the right games, so that you can do play-based therapy at the dinner table, or whenever the parent is with the child and has a couple of minutes to do that practice.
Mm.
So it is very much about that,
Mm.
and that's telehealth is a it's a great opportunity to do that.
Mm. Yeah. Look, I mean, it's still to many people, it's still kind of new, though, right? We were talking about how, there can be resistance from families sometimes to start using technology for things like therapy sessions, and we know coming up in the future we have these now AI therapists coming out, which are a little bit scary, but we have all sorts of tech everywhere, and it brings us to the third point about getting people's, I guess, confidence level up and trust level up in tech, because there's a lot of bad press at the moment with AI and hallucinations and all these terrible things AI is doing, and then there's privacy and all that. So, but when it comes to you know therapeutic technology, as in for delivering therapy, it is vital, right, for cleft affected people out in remote areas, because it's a very specialized service. And it's a range of services, as you mentioned. It's speech therapists and it's surgeons and it's a lot of different specialists involved. And I guess that reminds me of the myth of Hugh the Great. So he was studying the natural flow of water, and instead of them trying to force water to do what they wanted to do, he found a way of letting water find its own way, which is a nice metaphor for, if you want to use technology to the best, you kind of have to go with the flow of where technology finds itself. And there's a younger generation now where to them technology is embedded into their everyday life. So for young cleft affected people, kids being born, they'd nearly expect some sort of technology enablement. And I guess a little bit of that was in your grant application as well. It wasn't a nice way of where technology via online therapy, there is a bit of a slight shift there, right, with mindsets to embracing it and seeing it as something that is trustworthy and you can have a positive impact with it.
Yeah, so the pathway to the grant and the idea behind the grant, actually, it took a few turns. So the first
Hmm.
attempt, the idea was, well, if it's really hard for the families to get to therapy, what if we did a pilot program where we took the therapist to the patients, So
Okay.
I actually found an organization that in Australia, there's a very well known medical service called the Flying Doctors. Because of gigantic country, they fly
Yeah.
doctors to
Amazing.
the
Yeah.
places, where treatment is needed. And there was an equivalent allied health one that flew occupational therapists and speech therapists to remote towns where they are needed, right? So it's the
Okay.
equivalent of a flying doctor service, I guess, if you like.
Yeah.
And the initial idea was, what if we could get a couple of families who live in a similar geographic area to congregate in a town, a regional town, and then we could deliver a small group therapy in person,
Hmm.
and then in between have telehealth so that we could introduce the idea that telehealth would work.
Okay,
Just as
a good one.
yeah.
Yeah.
And but that was incredibly difficult because it was needing to find children that were the similar age that lived in the same
Mm,
remote geographical area. So it was quite challenging
mm,
to set up. And
yeah.
then and then earlier this year, I went to India for a holiday, and I met the surgeons at a Cleft clinic just by chance. I went
Okay.
to visit a friend, and her mum was a retired dentist who volunteers at a Cleft clinic, and she said, "Oh well, do you want to meet these people?" And you know, I was on holidays, didn't really have definitive plans, so okay, let's go meet them. And
Yeah.
by chance, the smallest world, one of the surgeons actually did his fellowship in Melbourne. So
Oh,
it was a very
wow.
small world. And one of the
Coincidence.
questions that I
Something
asked,
mythical about that. Mm.
that's right.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I asked him was, India is such a gigantic country and heavily
Yeah.
populated. So
Yeah.
how do you make these services, available? Because there can't be that many cleft clinics
Mm.
around. And when I asked him, where do your patients come from? Are they local? Are they, So that particular cleft unit was actually set up by an international charity called the Smile Train,
Okay.
and their patients do come from a long way away. I mean,
Mm.
uh, this surgeon was telling me about a patient that she was a university student, and she lives out in the Himalayas. And for her to come down
Wow.
to actually
Wow.
get to her appointments was an ordeal
That's
because she didn't have a car, so she had to rely on her uncle, who sometimes went into town to take her to a town, and she'd have to find her own way to Bangalore, which is where the clinic was, which
wow.
is really quite
Yeah.
incredible. And he said, well, yes, for a lot of our patients, it is incredibly challenging.
Mm.
So, and I asked him about what about young people? How do they connect? Because I'm trying to figure out how to connect the young people, the cleft affected young people, so that they have a little peer network.
Yeah.
And he said, well, they connect on WhatsApp.
That's it. They
When
connect
you,
on there.
that's
It,
right. And
yeah.
I guess if there is a will, people
Yeah.
find a way.
Yeah.
And so that when I came back to Melbourne, I had a connection at University of Melbourne. She's a lecturer in the speech pathology master's degree there, and she's a cleft specialist. So that's her passion, and
Excellent.
that's where she ended up specializing. And I don't remember exactly how we met, but I met her, and one of the we had a few conversations about telehealth can be also about educating. It doesn't have to be one-on-one therapy. It comes in many forms.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the current iteration of the technology as a way to do telehealth is now something that looks like this. So the idea was that we create some podcasts or short videos
Hmm.
from a qualified speech pathologist who will talk about language and speech development. So that's really the critical years where a
Yeah.
child develops speech. And primarily the goal was to instill the message that language and speech development is about practice. And here's some practical play-based ideas that you could actually implement at home. And the second goal of these short videos is to also explain how language development and speech acquisition might be different for a cleft affected child and what to look for. So that, if you start seeing certain patterns, that's
Hmm.
when you actually need the intervention and you go and seek out intervention.
Okay.
Because
Early intervention.
when we
Yeah.
did the survey, one of the things that families told us was that it is very expensive to pay for therapy every week. I mean,
Of
it's
course.
roughly about, between the $200 to $220
Mm.
mark per session of
Yeah.
therapy. And
Yeah.
that's a lot of money if you have to do therapy every week. So,
Definitely.
it's finding
Yeah. It's a good
the
use
happy
of
balance.
technology there, isn't it? It's like harnessing and reusing. It's kind of like, I mean, I do, I have this passion about storytelling for tech. So I have this small little masterclass I run, and I run it only every 2 months, maybe every month. But there's even parts of it that are pretty fundamental that I could just capture in short snippets and I make them available, and they just educate people from the very early stage, about what I'm talking about, which is storytelling to help sell technology better. But it can be applied to lots of different fields. I know I've met a lot of parents who have, and I have experienced myself around having anxiety and having kids that struggle, like most teenagers, and getting access to anxiety therapist or a counselor can be hard. But there's a whole load of these YouTube short videos now you can watch, and they're really educational, and they can just get the foundation piece there, right? Get the
Yeah.
awareness out that they're not going through it alone. Look, this is it's a great journey you're on. I mean, before we head towards the end, I just wanted to talk about a few key takeaways, I guess, Cheng, for people listening. Um, you've talked about families, clinicians, and technology, and cleft affected people. Um, like, what would be, I guess, from a tech perspective, what would be, in your view, the key, I guess, I guess the real value proposition tech brings to the likes of the society you're vice president of, or, in general, cleft affected people?
I guess my advice to families is to keep an open mind. Of course,
Hmm.
face to face therapy is often the best,
Hmm.
especially if you're trying to get a young child to concentrate long enough, to actually do the
Yeah.
therapy. But the reality is, it's a very big country, and, I guess don't rule it out as an option, as a treatment option. It may not be perfect, but it has a role,
Mm.
especially in a country this size.
Hmm. Yeah. And it also, it's there's an inclusion aspect there to it as well, isn't there? Like, it's I mean, it's getting better, right? Tech in general is getting better, as in all you need is a browser. You don't have to
Yes.
download sophisticated software or do much. You could even what you said, WhatsApp. Societies use WhatsApp. Kids use WhatsApp as groups.
Yes.
But yeah, but there is this element of accessibility, and I think there's lots of different options now to people, right, who want to use technology to help them through this. Whether you're a cleft affected person or a carer or even a clinician, it's there. You don't have to download sophisticated software. You can use it, access a browser, and it's free. You could even use your mobile phone, or later on an app, I'm sure. Um, Look, it's been great listening to your story around this whole thing. I know, just before we wrap up, I know you're also, obviously you're a leader in technology as well in Crown Resorts, and there's a lot of transformation going on, digital transformation in general, in the different services you provide. It must have been nice to be able to take some of that strategy and architecture and that sort of, abstract problem solving skill sets and apply them to something that's so close to your heart, and see the outcome, right? That must be quite, it's
Yes,
quite,
yes, it is.
quite
And,
nice.
it's been nice to, use some of the ideation techniques and facilitation techniques for the charity itself, and kind of produce an overall strategy about how we're going to raise funds, and so I've actually
Mm,
been able to apply the strategizer frameworks to the charity as a you know as a little business, if you like. So yes, it's been quite fulfilling to
mm.
apply it in a context that's quite
Yeah.
personal, and quite, yeah.
Yeah. And you think about, we have lots of frameworks like, TOGAF and all these architecture frameworks, and we talk business strategy, and we've operating models. We do a lot in tech that are, methods and frameworks that are proven, and they work, and they kind of make sense. But then to try to take that into something where, how can technology, enable outcomes for cleft affected people? It's like, well, you can take the best bits and apply them, and the other bits maybe you could, you don't need all of that skill set. But I do think a big part of it is your stakeholder management, right? Is listening. I mean, really, it comes down to listening, doesn't it? It's what is the need, and you're going for grants. Congratulations on getting the grant approval as well. I seen you shared
Thank
that
you.
on LinkedIn. Like, it's not easy to get these grants, so well deserved. But even getting that is, what you said earlier, it's a form of doing a strategy and a business case for a digital
Yeah,
transformation
pretty
program. It's no
much.
different. You're using digital to transform how the Cleft, Palate, and Lip Society operates for Victoria, right? So you're bringing your technology is helping you do that. It's a great story.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it is, as you say, it is a business case from the funder's point of view. They want to see, the outcomes, for like whatever it is, whatever the focus area is, whether it's better health outcomes for regional Australians or, you know, better mental health outcomes for, young families, whatever it is, there's a particular slant, with what a funder will fund and what they won't fund. And it is about applying those skills to say, well, are we a strategic fit for this funder? Or is this
Mm,
so much of an edge case
mm,
that we're better off focusing somewhere else for funding?
yeah. Yeah. And look, when I was talking to you before about preparing for this podcast, I was thinking, it's like I really enjoy talking to leaders in tech, and I particularly like women in tech because we haven't got enough women in technology. So it's fantastic to see you as a role model doing that, but also um, just telling the story around how the technology can make that real difference. And it kind of brings me back to those three myths, really, right, around the storytelling, right? It's like Menzies' mother. She wanted to give her son the right environment, so she moved house three times to find the right environment, and that's a physical move, yes, but in modern day times, people can't always move physically, but they can move themselves into a more nurturing environment to help their children or those affected by cleft palate. Also, there's Theseus in the Labyrinth, so that's one of my favorites. But it's just using technology as the thread to
Yeah.
stay connected, and to especially when you live very far away from these people who can help you in person. And then the third one was really about you, the great. So that's really about just trusting the technology, going with the movement, which is all about accessibility and trusting the therapy side. It can be a bit difficult in the beginning, but
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
the pros outweigh it greatly. And I think it's the way tech is going anyway. People are beginning to realize, the security is there and the privacy is there, so you can get onto telehealth and have a safe and positive session.
Yes.
But yeah, but that was that was the three things for me that stood out. It's about your journey is very inspirational as well, and what you've done and what you continue to do as vice president. It's a good journey ahead of you guys, and of course, in the meantime, you're architecting and strategizing inside Crown Resorts. So you got lots of exciting things going on.
Yes. Thank you. It's been, the reality is society and the digital world, well, that's always going to be part of our lives and our children's lives. And, there's a place for connection in the digital world too. And it's just about finding what the happy balance is.
Yeah, I like that. It's very well said. It's about not just connecting at the interaction level, which is, hey, let's get on a call and share this therapy session. It's more just having that like that you can find out about what other societies are doing on the other side of the world now, and you can have these sharing experiences that technology enables. I think it's fantastic, and it brings in different cultural aspects as well. Like what does clef
Yes.
that what does how do clef affected people get what is their experience in, say, Europe versus America versus Australia versus some of the Middle East or African countries. It very likely varies, but technology
Yeah.
can be that kind of leveler, that kind of common enabler, I guess, to help people, share and I guess find their way.
100%. And there are, a surprising number of charities and not-for-profit organizations around the world that are connected with Clefs, either because they're, doing missions, to help a certain community, where a whole medical team gets on a plane and arrives at a location and does multiple surgeries,
Amazing. Yeah.
and to other charities that just continue to promote well-being and mental health, for essentially what is a lifelong condition. You're always going to look a little different for quite some time, and you might sound a little different, depending on the severity of the cleft, quite some
Mm.
time. And at the end of the day, we all want a sense of belonging, and there's lots of people out there wanting to do something about creating a sense of belonging.
Yeah, and it's like the mythical village, isn't it? Really, it's about as giving, I guess, for leaders like yourself, giving back a little bit where you can of, your learnings and skills, but also, to celebrate this world we live in today, which is very diverse, and we have a lot of awareness about, you know, um, there's there's always a way to reach other people who might be experiencing the same things you're experiencing, and just embrace and use tech to do that, and it has much better outcomes for everybody. Well, look, Cheng, thank you so much for your time, for talking so openly about your experience and your exciting journey with the Cleft, Palate and Lip Society of Victoria. May I ask if any of our audience wants to get in touch or to support you guys, how can they go about doing that?
Yep, so we have a website. If you Google Cleft Palace Victoria, it's the first link that Google will return. There's some information. We also are on Instagram, so you can find us at Cleft Palace Victoria, and we're on Facebook. I'm trying to get the committee to figure out how we get on TikTok.
Yeah, you have to be on all the platforms these days. It's
Pretty
like,
much.
oh,
I mean,
well, it's
considering
funny
the
though.
age group that we
Yeah,
cover, we,
yeah,
we need to be on all of them.
yeah. Yeah, it's funny you say that because today I ended up connecting with someone. He's an author on LinkedIn, but I found him through TikTok. Like, and then before I jumped to LinkedIn, actually a reel on TikTok took me to a YouTube short that was a
Yes.
TED talk that then took me to him on LinkedIn. And I read the YouTube comments, and many of them said, TikTok brought me here, which is like, what's the chances of TikTok bringing people to, he was a leadership guy who talks about Eastern type philosophies. But yeah, again, I'm sure the algorithm knows what's going on, but it was quite interesting. But yeah, look, that's fantastic. And people can get in touch with you that way. And look, I'll put a link at the bottom of the information I share here on the podcast as well, so people can help you out. So, Cheng, thank you so much for all you've done, and keep leading the way.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
opportunity to share a little bit of our story as a charity.